Welcome to our webinar, Buying Property Safely in Europe. Whether you're buying a holiday home or your retirement home abroad, it's often a new experience for many people. We will take you through that process to reassure you that with the right professional support, you can buy safely in Europe. One of the things that does come up quite regularly is that people who do have difficulties quite often have not engaged a lawyer that is acting on their behalf and so on. Sometimes they can come from sources that are not independent and so on. So that's one of the key things that I think you should take on. I'm Nigel Ayres. I lived in Hong Kong, Malaysia, the US, and for the last 3.5 years in Spain. I've run Expat Network and will be sort of chairing things today. We're joined today by Pauline Johnson of Beau Village, who will be covering France, Joanne Alderton covering Spain of Aldertons, and Luis de Silva of Algarve Senior Living, Property Finders, Portugal, and a myriad of other brands. So he will obviously be covering Portugal. So one or two of you have indicated that you're interested in Italy, Greece, Cyprus, and Eastern Europe. I'm afraid we will not be covering those countries today. If you do need any support in those, just drop me a line at expats@expatnetwork.com, and we'll try to put you in touch with somebody who can assist you. We're here to answer any questions you have, and if you have any questions, please just use the button on your screen to submit them. We'll answer any that we can live. Any that we miss, we'll send you an email responding to those after the event. So perhaps if we can get started, and we'll start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So Pauline, could you start off by introducing yourself and your business, obviously?
Yeah. Pauline Johnson, lived in France for 20 years. I live down in the Aude department, so it's down by the Mediterranean side, close to Spain. It borders on Spain. Lived here for 20 years, worked with Beau Village for 5 years, initially as an estate agent in the Limoux, Carcassonne area. And now I'm a regional sales manager, so I cover several managers and different shops further north. Previously a history of running sheets when I first came over here for 10 years. And so I've got experience at that, but Beau Village now cover most of the southwest of France with about 20 agencies and 180 selling agents. So quite a large group, and we're also associates with Savills.
And I understand that other areas of France you have connections that you can refer.
We do. We have partner agencies in some of the other areas. So yes, but it's quite obvious when you look on our site that it's predominantly the southwest.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Joanne, perhaps we could ask you next.
Hi everybody, yes, my name is Joanne Alderton. This is my colleague Emma Jones, and I am the owner of a relocations agency named Aldertons of Spain. My background is I have been traveling the world for many, many years. I've lived in Cuba, Sri Lanka, Mexico, Goa, lots of various different places all over the world, and for the past 20 plus years I've lived in Spain, and that includes all of the coastal regions along with all of its islands. So I have a plethora of experience in setting up in new locations, and my business focuses primarily on helping you to do exactly the same thing. So we are relocation specialists. We're all fully qualified in Spanish immigration, and we basically, like I say, specialize in home hunting, property finding, investment hunting, and making sure the right visas and permits are in place for you so that your journey from A to B is a smooth and enjoyable one.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Luis de Silva, if you could give us a background.
Sure, thanks, Nigel. Welcome, everyone. Yes, Luis de Silva. So our focus is on Portugal, and a bit like Joanne, we are property finders. Many years ago, in relation to Portugal, we decided that it was impossible, even though it's a small country, to set up agencies all over it. And so we have very much the approach of working with partner agencies, listing agents across the country. We have around 130 of those relationships across Portugal, covering most of the country. And for those of you in the UK, very similar, nothing out of the usual, but those of you from the US, if there is anyone listening, very similar to the MLS system. We try to overcome the fact that there isn't a central registration database of properties. I've been in real estate for a couple of decades now, but before that I used to run software and consulting firms, so that you can see the clear link between the two, of course. But my family is Portuguese. I've lived off and on in Portugal. The last stint was about 10 years or so. So we're here to help people either move permanently as retirees, second homes, or investment, a bit like Joanne in Spain.
Okay, well, thank you. With the registration information we picked up from everybody, it's clear that many of you have a clear idea of where you want to. Oh, sorry, I'm getting an incoming call. Sorry about that. Many of you have a clear idea of where you want to live, but a fairly large proportion will also have multiple countries. In some cases, you have ticked every country that we had as an option. So, there are a number of you who clearly, know that you want the sunshine, if you like, but haven't yet decided where exactly to take the advantage of that. So I think what we're going to do is start off by having each of our panelists give us a little overview of their country. What are the attractions? What are the main areas that expats tend to move to? And perhaps just an overview of what the sort of market is like at the moment. So, Pauline, could you lead us off?
Yep. So for France, certainly for the Southwest, people are buying for lots of different reasons. And transport links are quite often a key element there. So we get quite a lot of early retirees. We get a lot of people from within France that are moving further south, or we get people from Spain coming up to France to be closer to the UK. So our market at the moment is about 50-50 in terms of French people and others being British, American, Scandinavian, Belgian, Dutch, etc. For some people, they want to be within driving distance to UK, so they might prefer to go the Dordogne, for example, or towards the coast and the Charente. Dordogne is always a really popular place for British people, and down in the Aude, where I am, is probably the most popular. We get a lot of requests for down there because you've got the advantage of Spain, the Mediterranean, and you've got the skiing for the Pyrenees, so really popular down there. But it's horses for courses. There's property prices for everybody. There are some departments that are less expensive than others. And I think the key element for me is for people to do their research before they come down here to view. Think about your budget and think about where you want to be, and be sure on that before you start looking, whether you want a pretty stone house or something coastal or historic village. And some people might be price driven. So there's lots of elements to take into consideration, but do your research and come and have a holiday and try and narrow the area down. And we can help you find that dream property.
I'm sorry, it helps if I unmute. Paul, Joanne, could you possibly give us an outline on Spain? Thank you.
I certainly can. So obviously Spain is the largest destination for expats throughout Europe, especially when it comes to early retirees and retirees. We are seeing a shift recently in the demographic of people moving to Spain, and there are many more families than previously recorded. So there's a lot of people coming, not just from Europe now to Spain, but from all over the world. One of my biggest markets I deal with are now the Americans and the Canadians, and that's a really fast growing market over here. Spain is just eternally popular, because of the weather. I mean, the one thing that will never change is that big yellow thing in the sky will always continue to shine and give us the heat throughout the coastal regions. But Spain unbeknownst to many people, is the second most mountainous country in Europe. So it has an amazing attraction for people that are interested in outdoor pursuits, keeping fit and healthy. We have the ski resorts as well. We have absolutely everything to appeal to everybody, plus 2 or 3 of the major cities in Europe, such as Madrid, Barcelona, and Valencia is fast approaching that iconography. So yeah, it's an amazing place to be. The culture, the history, the language, the food is just out of this world. And the lifestyle that Spain offers people is just brilliant. The major thing about Spain and why it's so comfortable for people, though, is that you have this level of comfort or this level of support just underneath the surface. So it makes it not too scary to uproot your life and move it to a new country, because there's many people that have done it beforehand. So there's lots of networks that you can rely on, lots of people like myself that can help you do these things and move over here with comfort. So it really is a fabulous place to come. With regards to the prices of Spain at the moment and what's drawing people, there is, as Pauline said, horses for courses. There is something for everybody. We have things from 50,000 euros in medieval villages and small apartments, all the way up to 30, 40 million euros for ridiculously crazy gold-plated taps, etc. So there's everything in between. Whatever floats your boat, we can find it. There's also boats available as well.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. And finally, Lewis, if we could ask you to cover Portugal.
Yeah, sure. So Portugal is, in terms of scale, much smaller than France and Spain, both of which offer a myriad of options, including very different coastlines between north and south. That sort of variety, if you will, is not as marked in Portugal, although of course we have different microclimates in the islands, in the Azores, which is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and Madeira, which is in the middle of the Atlantic, but going sort of south along the African coastline, so similar to the Canary Islands. So as far as the mainland of Portugal is concerned, mostly 3 regions tend to grab the attention of most people. The Algarve in the south, which is obviously known for its beaches, its weather, an established expat population, which is now very multinational, so dozens and dozens of nationalities there. So that's certainly an attraction. And coming to Joanne's point about families, we have a range of international schools in the southern region of the Algarve, which means it also appeals increasingly to families. Then we have the greater Lisbon area, metropolitan and so on. It certainly stands out as providing a lot of options. We have a region called the Silver Coast, which is between sort of Lisbon and Porto, and that in the past was considered maybe a cheaper alternative to the Algarve, although it isn't anymore, and you need to look at climate and so on. And then Porto and Braga in the north have stood out recently. So Nigel asked me to talk a bit about this. We'll cover this in detail in the country presentation, but one point I wanted to make is that in Portugal, the coastline, the great real estate deals along the coast are a thing of the past in the main. I don't want to create the impression that, Portugal is cheap and cheerful in the most popular areas. It isn't anymore. We've had 10 years of continuous growth, the longest period of real estate growth ever on record. And that means there's huge pressure on prices as well as a pressure on rentals. And by the way, one of the things we encourage is people to rent sometimes before buying, in order to figure out where they're going. And we're one of the largest players in long-term rentals as well as doing real estate sales. So we don't really care what you choose, whether you choose to rent before buying or whatever, it's a mitigating factor. So just a bit of an overview of Portugal. If you want cheaper real estate, you're going to have to go inland, because that's where the better and cheaper options are to be found at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Lewis. So I think most of our audience will be familiar with the process of buying property in the UK, but may not be as familiar with buying abroad in Europe and how that varies from the UK. Some will have heard of horror stories of problems of buying in Europe. And I just wondered, is it safe to buy in Europe, and what are the secrets to ensure you achieve a trouble-free property purchase? Perhaps if we could start with Joanne now.
Okay, so yes, of course it's safe to buy in Europe. It's one of the most stable economies in the world. The Eurozone it's very well protected financially by the European Bank. So yeah, it's a very safe purchase process. As with all areas of the world, due diligence is what you need to employ when you are purchasing any property anywhere. Never take one person's word for it. Always employ people that are going to be on your side. Independent agents, independent lawyers, independent surveyors, etc., etc. These people are then working for you. That's why, you know, one of the reasons we set up as buyers agents, as property finders, was from our own personal experience, but also numerous experiences of people over here purchasing through maybe one agency who has an in-house lawyer, etc., etc., which isn't always bad. There's lots of stories out there of people, you know, being hoodwinked or whatever. You know, there's laws in place these days to offset that, but it's always better due diligence to choose someone who's going to work on your side and follow that process through, and do your homework as to what the actual process is in the country that you're thinking of buying in. So it does vary massively from country to country, but within Spain itself, it varies from autonomous region to autonomous region because there's individual laws and bylaws in place for each of these regions. So it's absolutely imperative that you do your homework as well and make sure that you're finding the right people to work on your behalf to guide you through that process.
Right. And Lewis, is there anything you'd like to add to that to advise people on making sure that they get a trouble-free purchase?
Yeah, not much. I think Joanne's covered it in the main. I think a key thing, the independence, I would stress in the same way as Joanne does. And this is not pitching one sort of model against the other. It's the fact, even if you look at some of the large agencies, you know, the Remaxes and the KWs and so on, people within them are trying to brand themselves as sort of finder agents within an agency, which is a bit of a contradiction because there's always a thing. But just pick up on that point. Contractually, an agent that lists a property is obligated to get the best deal for the seller. That is what contractually they are entitled and obligated to do. Therefore, when you come at it as at the problem as a buyer, you've got to bear in mind that most of the intermediaries in a process are representing the seller, even though, of course, there are many very good people that try to get this balance right, but contractually they are obligated to get maximum price for the seller. So that's very important. The other thing is the independence of lawyers. You always need a lawyer to validate the purchase in some way or another. The role of the lawyer will be greater or lesser. The notaire in France is much more important than a lawyer in Portugal, for example. But the concept of an independent, somebody who takes an independent legal view of the transaction is absolutely fundamental. And then the other thing is how you make payments. The other thing is set yourself up with Forex accounts so that you minimize costs of transactions, things like that. There are a number of little things you can do to make the transaction smoother and less and lower risk.
Yes, Pauline, was there anything? I think one of the things here is that Lewis and Joanne both are what we call property finders, whereas Beauviage is a property agency. And obviously France works differently to the other two. So is there anything you have to add?
I think both of them have covered it quite well. There is a difference. As Joanne said, I think the taking responsibility to do the homework is vital, really, so that they know what to expect and when and how, and do your research. I think Lewis touched on it in terms of the notarial system over here. So it is not uncommon to have a notaire dealing with both the buyer and the vendor. So that can happen, and they are legally obligated to deal with both independently. Fees are another thing where fees are set by the state. So changing notaire is not going to make any difference if you have different notaires. But find a good agent. I know I work for an estate agency, but we have a lot of good agents out there who will get the best price for both parties. And that's what I do day in, day out. You know, it is finding an agreement and common ground to get the best for both, so that the vendor can move on to a new project. The buyer gets the house of their dreams and starts a new life. But yeah, a good agent and a good notaire, and listen to the good agent in terms of recommendations for a good notaire.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from some personal experience here in that when I first looked to buy in Spain, I used an agent, somebody I knew through this business and so on. And we looked to buy a property and everything seemed to be going. The developer it was a new build. The developer was very friendly and worked very well. But throughout the process, we had what you can call it an underbuild. And that underbuild was due to be a garage, but we'd said we wanted it as a bedroom. And that was stated from day one. But when it came to me signing up, suddenly there was an additional €28,000 added to the bill for this underbuild, and that which fundamentally changed the nature of the purchase. And it was very clear to me that the agent had not actually passed on our comments fully to the developer. And obviously he has a long-term relationship with that developer, and therefore, you know, his loyalty was slightly balanced towards things. Now, some of it was misunderstanding, but I think it just emphasizes that you do need to be sure that you are, you know, getting everything across and so on. It was all resolved reasonably satisfactorily. But many of the stories that we hear here at Expat Network are about people who have used lawyers that have clearly not, in retrospect, been independent, and that I think is one of the biggest sources of problems. So I entirely agree with Joanne. There are many agents that have very good arrangements with lawyers and so on, but that independent lawyer is probably the single most important thing to achieve. So
and sorry, Nigel, can I just add something here that remember, which is I think also important, which we don't emphasize enough, but it's so important. It is a dog-eat-dog world out there in the real estate business. Honestly, we're not going to mince our words about this. And what happens is there is a lot of between incorrect information, misleading information, duplicate information, price, inconsistency, whatever. So if you have someone, and whether it be as Pauline has described, you know, an individual agent that you can trust, that you can work with, or as Joanne and I have discussed, a property finder that represents your interests, one of the key things that this person does is they shelter you from a lot of this mess, because it often can get to the point where you're thinking, should I be thinking twice about doing this, because it is just so messy, you know, and how does anyone navigate these kind of situations? So I think this creating a shield and an ability to go out to, let's say, a listing agent, validate information, checking if a pool is legal before presenting something, you know, to a client, checking if an extension is whatever. This role cannot be underestimated, and it shelters you as a buyer from perhaps some of the sharper ends, the trickier, sharper end of the process, to avoid that sort of situation, Nigel, you encountered, because if you have somebody on your side that will make absolutely sure that the offer is accepted, subject to the developer knowing that the basement is going to be a bedroom and not a garage, for example, you know, and we actually get that in writing before we even move on to the next step to avoid that issue. So small things you learn in hindsight, but, you know, we've been there a long time now, so we try to avoid the obvious traps.
Yep. I would say, on a personal note, that I keep meaning to write an article, which I will do in the near future, The Incompetent Expat, which will be based upon a series of my bad decisions over the many years of living abroad. Perhaps we could move on now to the role of the agent in themselves. Now, most people, again, will be familiar with estate agents in the UK, but I think that in France, Portugal, Spain, and so on, they sometimes have a slightly different role. So, Pauline, could you start by sort of explaining a little bit about how it works in France and how that might vary from the
UK? And I don't know how it varies to Spain, so it'll be interesting listening to the other comments. But but certainly there's no comparison to what happens in the UK. The estate agent gets far more involved, and that's at every step of the way. And it is very much a hand-holding. So in UK, a lot of it gets just passed on to the conveyancer. Most of the agents are employed and really just do the brochures, do the viewing, and then it gets passed on to the conveyancer. For us, it's anything but that, really. So we get involved when we've got an offer, or even when we're taking a property on, to get all the permissions in the early days, so we know that we can work on any issues further down the line. So that might be pertaining to certain works that have been done, certain permissions, septic tank, diagnostics, etc. So we try to do all of that very much in the early days. We will hold hands right throughout, explaining things as we go. We will be there for the compromise signing. We'll be there for the final signing. We'll be there to do property checks, to read the meters, all of those things. Negotiate on furniture, check the furniture, check that everything's working. Absolutely, the whole gambit. We will be also asking for proof of funds. So as soon as a sale is agreed, one of the things that we would ask to see is proof of funds. So this is all this thing about getting your ducks in a row, so that not only are you doing the research, but that you know how you're going to finance your project. And so that we would not mark an offer as accepted until we'd seen proof of funds, because we don't want to go to the notaire with something that's going to fall down because you've not got the finances in place, or you've not approached the bank, or whatever it's going to be. So we really get quite heavily involved, and it comes back to, you know, working with a good agent, and they will take, exactly as Lewis said, that they will take a lot of that pressure off you, but it's not keeping you out of it, it's keeping you informed and included, but that we do a lot of things behind the scenes that will make your transaction smoother for you.
Okay, many thanks, Pauline. Joanne, perhaps if you could explain what happens in Spain.
Yeah, so in Spain, as Louise mentioned earlier, it is very much a dog-eat-dog world over here. There are majority of the autonomous communities in Spain do not have regulations with regards to real estate, estate agency, etc. This means that there are many people reselling a property, many times without permission. They just lift that property off one of the websites of the property portals and start republishing it, in the hope that you will get in touch with them. They will then get in touch with the original lister of that property and will get a share of the commission. So it's a very different world from the UK and the States, where you do have to be regulated in order to practice. It is changing in Spain. In my community, the Valencian community, which covers all of Alicante as well, also in Barcelona, which is what am I trying to say here? Catalonia, sorry, I had a blonde moment then. Catalonia, and also in Mallorca and the Balearics, they are now introducing a scheme of registration which must be in place by October of this year. So if you again have a duty of responsibility to ensure that you're dealing with a registered, reputable agent. It will roll out in other areas of Spain as well, but at the moment they're the three areas that you need to be looking at that are employing this. Now, what it means when you're buying a property in Spain or looking for a property in Spain, Spain commissions on sales are quite high. They vary from between 4%, anything up to 15% on sales if it's through a development. Now, that's a massive amount of commission, and that's being filtered through to 4, sometimes 5 different agencies down the chain, depending who you've contacted originally. So if you contact someone who's just a reseller at the bottom, they want their cut, and it goes all the way up the chain, and you are actually doing yourself a disservice because you're not going to get the best deal. By making sure that you're either going direct to the original lister or using a property finder who will find that information out for you, you're making sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity to get a better deal on a property over here. It also means that the information on that property is going to be vetted, because believe you me, if you're coming out with myself or Emma or with Louise as a property finder, and I'm sure with Pauline with one of her agency staff, then you're going to know that you're with someone that's already checked that information for you before you go and see it. And if there are anomalies, we're going to say, right, we're going to go and see this house. However, things to be aware of. There's a pool here. I can't see it on the cadastral, which is like a land registry form. Can't see it there. So we need to check that that's going to be registered. There's lots of things. There's lots of pitfalls that you can fall into that we're here to hold your hand and make sure that that is not going to come and, to put it politely, bite you on the bum later down the way. We need to be making informed decisions if we're going to put offers in. We're talking a lot of money, and we need to make informed decisions before we start discussing the money that you want to hand over for something. So yeah, it's very important that you do like I said before, due diligence on who you're going to use to represent you during that process over here. When you do find a property that you want, initially, you will always put a reservation fee down in Spain. Now, that differs normally between 3,000 and 5,000 euros, dependent on the price of the house and also dependent on the autonomous region that you're in. Once you've put that money down, that money is held by the agency that's listed it. That will then make sure that you've got a set number of weeks, normally 3 to 4 weeks, in order to do the conveyancing. And that's the point where you will take on an independent lawyer. You will also ask them to act on your behalf to make sure that that property is free of debt and that everything is registered. And then during that time, that lawyer will draw up something that's called the arras contract. So it's the exchange contract, okay? It's the arras contract. And that is the contract that will detail everything that's included in that sale. It will also detail a date by which you must have completed the purchase of that property. That is the legally binding contract, pretty much the same as exchange of contracts if you're looking in UK terms. At that point, when you sign that contract, you will be asked to pay the arras fee, which is 10% of the overall property value that you're purchasing it for. That's minus the reservation fee of the 3,000 or 5,000 you've already put down. So once you've done that, that is a legally binding contract. And what you do have here in Spain, which I think is personally very good, is that if somebody pulls out of the sale after that arras contract, they will lose that 10% deposit. However, if the seller pulls out of the sale after you've signed the arras contract, not only will you get your 10% back, but they are legally bound to compensate you a further 10% as well. So it's a really good safety net of making sure once you get to the arras stage, that sale's pretty much going to go all the way through and that house is yours. So it's a really, that I think is a really good system. One thing to be aware of is that many people, Pauline mentioned the notaire in France, and you do have the notary here in Spain. The notary in Spain is a legal eyes and ears. They're not, many agencies will tell you, oh, you can just go straight to notary, don't use a solicitor, don't use a lawyer. Our advice is always use a lawyer and get those checks done. The notary is not legally bound to check the legal status of the property, that everything's registered or that there's no debts. What the notary will do is actually read out the details of the contract and highlight to you if there's any anomalies, but will not actually fix them. So you do have to sign for the property in front of a notary because they are the government's eyes and ears and are basically saying you're of legal sound and mind to enter into this contract, but they are not contractually obliged to make sure that everything on that property is 100% hunky-dory. So always have a solicitor who will then take you to the notary.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Lewis, if we could turn to you, and Joanne has outlined the process of the buying process as well as the sort of role of the agent. So perhaps if you could cover the role of the agent in Portugal and also talk us through the buying process, how it works.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of similarities to Spain in Portugal, more so than to France. One of the big differences is the notaire lawyer dichotomy. But a couple of points that I'd like to make. Firstly, Portugal is actually a highly regulated selling environment. We have a regulator that regulates real estate agencies, a regulator that imposes a whole range of different training and other mechanisms. And therefore, even as a finder agency, we ensure, one thing that we do is ensure that in every transaction, there is at least a regulated, so the entity that lists is one of these regulated entities. And why is this important? Because paperwork. One of the things that the regulation covers is ensuring that whoever lists a property actually has to check out the paperwork in terms of the habitation license, the updated plans, what is licensed, and so and whatnot, and they get inspected all the time. So you cannot actually list a property. In theory, of course, if you're not keeping to the law and you get caught out, you get a fine, and they fine you heavily. So it's a big paperwork exercise to keep this up to date. So the first thing is regulation in Portugal is actually higher than a couple of other countries, for example, in relation to Spain, which is still catching up. But what that means, and 2 points about this, is one is a lot of the channels which make properties available to the market are not regulated. So the portals, you go on to, I don't know, Rightmove or whatever. These are not regulated platforms. So anything can get onto the platform, and there is no guarantee that via platform, the information itself has been vetted. And so coming back to this, the need to have someone in between to actually make sure that the information is correct, it's very, very important. In relation to the comparison to the UK, the one point that I would make is, in the UK, I say that it's kind of almost a self-regulating market. You pay a 1% on average commission to the agent, and anything sells in the UK at some point, and the prices are pretty much within a range. If you go and make someone an offer of 10% below asking price, you will be kicked out of there by the agent, and your offer will not even be put forward, because the agents are like a little sort of grouping, that they know that the prices in a certain area are going to only move by a couple of percent. That was very different in Southern Europe in the past. After the 2008-2009 crisis, prices dropped, in places like Spain, 50%, Portugal, 40%, France, maybe a little bit less. And so there's a lot of margin for negotiation. What I'd like to sort of alert people to is that those times to largely have passed, because there's such a demand for property and not enough inventory. Now, I'm not saying everywhere, but what I'm saying is some people have become accustomed to Europe as being the kind of, oh, we'll just go in there and haggle. You see a place in the sun and people are buying properties for £45,000 and getting 3 bedrooms. This is all kind of almost semi-fictitious now. And so part of the role of the agent is actually making sure that you get a variety of options, but not just through one agent. Now, Pauline's company is different because she's got a huge coverage of a big area, a lot of detail, but most agents are not like that. You go to Portugal or Spain, they only cover a town or a village, and the next one is another agent. And so you need someone, especially if you don't know where you're going, to cover all these things. So to come back to what Nigel's asking me to explain, the role of the agent does this role. So a finder agent will do this role, because if you just go to different companies, you could be talking to 20 or 30 agents, each showing you 1 to 2 properties, okay? In terms of the buying process, similar thing. We have a promissory contract, which is the same as the arras, 10% down, sometimes 20 if you want to ask for an extended completion date, for example. You lose your deposit if you fail to perform or to deliver, and the seller loses double if they fail to perform on the contract. The one thing that we would say, and this is also a personal thing for me, is in Portugal, we do have the concept of a reservation deposit, which typically is a fixed amount, 5,000, 10,000 euros. But it's normally only applied in the big cities where the agents are keen to get the seller to take the listing off the other portals. And the only way they can do that is by showing them some money. Okay, regionally, this is not a good thing, and I'm personally against it because it has no legal value. And sometimes we have these cases of agents taking lengths of time to return a deposit if the deal doesn't go through. So be aware of where you're buying and what the culture is. If you're in big cities in Portugal, a reservation deposit is appropriate, but get a proper contract with the with the real estate agency that actually holds the deposit. Otherwise, resist the reservation deposit and go straight to CPCV or promissory contract would be our suggestions. And then the other thing that I would say is that we do a lot of things in Portugal for foreign people on trust. So Pauline was mentioning a proof of funds. It's very rare. I mean, we do ask, and people sometimes ask, do you want a mortgage or not a mortgage? Because an offer must be made with the clause that it is dependent on a mortgage or not, because the promissory contract or the arras in Spain will then state there that this is subject to obtaining a mortgage or not, right? So you've got to state that. But we never ask whether the person's good for the money. I mean, it's hardly ever asked, and it's a crazy thing, actually, but it's a cultural thing. People come along and say, hey, I'm a millionaire. Oh, great. Oh, we're going to deal with you because you say you're a millionaire, but no one actually checks. So this is cultural. And because a lot of people are buying cash, and these days, and not many are applying for mortgages, especially in the sort of retiree space, one does ask oneself, it places a lot of pressure on the intermediary to also make sure that they don't present dud clients to the sellers. So just both sides of the story there.
Okay, many thanks. So, Pauline, perhaps if you could outline the sort of what happens once somebody's found their property and take us through the buying process in France.
So an offer is made, a price is negotiated and agreed. We find out whether they are going for a mortgage, whether it's a property to sell, proof of funds if it's cash, etc., like that. Once an agreement is made, we would then do a letter of intention. So that would be an electronic document that's drawn up and is sent to the vendor and the buyer. So it's, in essence, it's saying that Mr. X is agreeing to sell to Mr. Y at set price and vice versa, that Mr. Y is willing to buy from Mr. X at set price. And that's a sort of holding. And we usually set that for about 6 weeks in advance, that the compromis, which is the first signing, needs to be done within that time frame. And within that time frame, then we would be, hopefully, I'd like to think that the agents have got most of the information already from the vendor regarding permissions, authorizations, etc. There's certain legal obligations that need to be done. The diagnostics need to be updated and various other things, and to do with septic tanks and various aspects like that. So they would all get verified. All the information from the vendors and from the buyers would get collated, normally by us, and then get sent to the notaire. Now, that might be one notaire or two notaires. So it gets sent to the notaire, and the notaire would prepare the compromis, which is this initial contract. Again, we would go to the signing for that. They would get to see that, and all negotiations would be done around that. There might be certain conditions that have been added. Once that is signed, the buyer has 10 days to change their mind. They can withdraw without any penalty within that 10 days. Once the 10 days has passed, they would have a penalty. They would then get asked to pay usually a 10% deposit during that 10-day period, a 10% deposit, and if they withdrew after the 10 days, they would lose that. Once the 10 days is passed, once the vendor is completely obligated to sell. The buyer can withdraw within the 10 days, but the vendor can't. And then after the compromise is signed, which is the one that looks in real detail at the property and permissions, etc., the notaire then has usually about 2 to 3 months, usually 2 months, 2.5 months, and they look at all the legal stuff for the property: who owns it, who's got right to sell it, rights of way. They go back over 30 years in terms of ownership. So everything gets checked at, gets looked at and checked. And then when that's all complete, we would move to the acte de vente. So the day before the signing, myself would go in with the buyers or with the vendors, and we would check the furniture, we would check the state of the property, we would read the meters. And if everything is still okay, we would all go along to the signing the next day. and that's where we would do the final exchange and keys would be handed over. So every I is dotted and every T is crossed along the way, and that's whether it's with one notaire or with two, and dependent on language as well and what translations would be required. From start to finish, it's approximately 3 to 4 months, dependent. Sometimes if there's land involved, we go to what's called SAFAIR, and they get first dibs in terms of if there's a local farmer. So that might add just a couple of weeks onto that, but normally you'd be looking about 3 to 4 months from start to finish.
Okay, many thanks. One of the things that Lewis touched on was that, you know, the estate agent commission in the UK is so much lower than it in other markets and so on. Could you just give us an idea of what the additional costs beyond the price, the purchase price, would be in each of the countries? I think it'll probably vary. Lewis, if we could ask you first.
Yeah, sure. So we have a couple of main costs. IMT, which is a transfer tax, is basically paid on the value actually paid for the property, and it's a sliding scale up to a maximum of well 7.5, but anyway 6-ish% is from about 500,000. Then we have a stamp duty, which is a fixed amount of 0.8%. Then we have the legal costs, which are typically 1% on average, 1% plus VAT of the transaction cost. And then we have some notary fees, which are typically 500 or whatever. So on average total, and the range depends on the value of the property. The higher the property, the higher the transfer total cost. You're looking at between 6 to 8%, I think, is a reasonable range. I think it's probably among the lowest in Europe, still in Portugal, 6 to 8.
Okay, thanks. And Joanne, what about Spain? What are the sort of additional costs that people should consider?
Yeah, so again, it's dependent on the autonomous region that you're looking in. But for example, in the Valencian community, which again incorporates all of the Alicante, Costa Blanca region, then what you're looking at here are the purchase taxes, which is the purchase tax which is applicable to the overall selling price of the house. In this region, that's set at 10%, up to the value of €1 million. And then if the purchase is over €1 million, then it goes to 11%. We also have over here notary fees, which typically about 0.5%, 0.7% of the purchase price of the house. The lawyer's fees, again, we always say budget 1 to 1.5%. And then you've got land registry fees and the fees for actually signing the property into the land registry and what's called the cadastral over here. Again, a small percentage. But what we would say is we always say to every client, budget 15% over the price that you're putting on in as an offer. And you will always have money left over. If you just budget 10% or 11%, invariably you're going to come short. So budget 15% and you will always have money left over. That's the best advice I can give you there.
Okay, thanks, Joan. And Pauline, what about France? What are the additional costs there?
Well, France is a bargain in comparison. So in terms of additional costs, really, there's only a notaire's fee. That is all that the buyer would be expected to pay. You might, if you wanted to have an additional survey, that would be at your cost, because over here we don't have surveys as such. We have diagnostics that cover lead, termites, asbestos, electric, noise, all sorts of elements, but not structural surveys. So that might be something that somebody would want to pay for. People tend to buy as seen over here. So theoretically, the only cost that you would have would be the notaire's fees, which is about 7.5%. I always say 8%, so that people have always got a little bit more. And of that 8%, about 75% is stamp duty, for the government. So that would be the only expense that they would have other than the usual standard removals.
Okay, thanks. And yes, you raised a question of survey there, and obviously in the UK that's pretty standard practice that you would have a survey, and obviously the mortgage company would want one, but generally you want a structural survey yourself. So Joanne, what about Spain? Would you normally recommend people to have a survey done?
Sorry guys, do you want to just go on to Louise first, because the postman has just turned up? So the doctor started.
Okay, Lewis, could you tell us about Portugal?
Exactly. Well, get those dogs under control, and the poor postman's running for his life or her life. Yeah. So structural survey, not common, but 3 points I'd make here in Portugal. Doing a structural survey for an apartment is in total and utter waste of time and money, because there are too many shared spaces and you can't control the whole thing. So got a condominium or homeowners association, so do that. So apartment, don't waste your time. As regards villas and standalone properties, I think here we have two scenarios. Where there is a property that is maybe older, has been through some structural renovation, or visibly you can see there may be some issue, I would say do it. Otherwise, it's not common. And when you do it, so if you're in that category where you're doing it, please be aware of the fact, especially coming from the UK, there's often a lot of talk about using a RICS surveyor, in Portugal. The RICS, I mean, in addition to the fact, and forgive me any RICS surveyors that may be listening to me at the moment, but the way that one does a survey in the UK is quite high level. If you can't get into an attic or into a loft, you say, well, I couldn't get into the attic or the loft. If I can't go behind the panel, I can't say I couldn't check whether there was humidity because something was blocking the way. This is not really what we want. We want, when you want to do a survey, you want to do a bit of an invasive survey. So what we suggest is, if you get to the stage where you are considering a survey, pick a local engineer, and do not necessarily pick just a RICS surveyor, because the UK qualification does not come with an insurance in Portugal. So you could have an experienced person, but if something goes wrong and they give you the wrong advice, you cannot go and claim on their insurance because it's not valid. Okay, so just an alert there. There are local engineers that are regulated. Use them, because they will be liable if they give you some wrong advice.
Okay, thanks. And hopefully we're dog free now, Joanne. Can we?
I am, yeah, sorry. So yeah, it's exactly the same as Louise has just said. It's very unusual to have a survey over here in Spain. A Spaniard would just say, okay, what was that for? However, when we are talking about villas or independent standalone houses, casas, fincas, things like that, then absolutely, we always make sure that we do get a survey done on that house. And it might just be that the survey is a visual survey of the state of repair of that property, taking into account the types of pipes that are used for the plumbing, because it could be lead piping or old copper piping or something like that, and the state of the electrics, and finding out what wattage of electricity runs into that property and what the wiring's like. They're the two main components. We also have things here. It's very common for properties to be built straight onto the rock bed, which does cause damp. Damp is not anything to be very scared of over here. It's a very common problem. It's a humid country, especially in the winter. It's about knowing how to manage the damp and how to combat the damp. And getting a good surveyor in will teach you how the property in Spain lives and breathes in comparison to a property in your home country. He or she will put it into layman's terms and allow you to make an informed decision as to how you're going to care for that property. So it's not just about structural defects, etc., etc. It's about learning how to manage the property in a new environment. So yes, we do always make sure our clients get a survey, but it might not be, as Lewis has said, a RICS surveyor that you would be used to when you're purchasing a property if you're coming from the UK, for example.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we could also just touch on mortgages. I think with retirement, people retiring abroad or pre-retirement, many will be financing from either from the remortgage of their UK property, from the sale of their UK property, or from their own investment and savings. But some may need a mortgage, and obviously, if you're moving later in life, it may be different in terms of what age restrictions there may be in the mortgage market and so on, and how the mortgage market works. Could you just give us an outline of how you could obtain a mortgage, what sort of age restrictions there are, what sort of terms that they can expect, and so on? Perhaps Pauline, if you'd like to take that one first.
Oh, right. So not an easy one to answer. So the way we work is that if there is somebody who is requiring a mortgage, then within Beauvillage, we have our financial department who will gear them, who will steer them, I should say, to particular banks that we know might be more inclined to loan to a British person. So we've worked closely with a lot of banks. So that's the first thing. But again, as agents and as a good agent, we have down where I am, we have a financial advisor. We have a few local financial advisors who've actually been really good with people who have been wanting to earn to loan smaller amounts. So it's all well and good going to the big banks for, you know, 200 or 300, whatever, over X amount of years. But if you're only wanting 50 or 75,000 to borrow, we have found it's more useful to go to the local financial advisors who've been able to work miracles in some cases. So it's not my expertise, so I would never, I would be able to give slight advice and I can steer them in the right direction and point them to the experts, but it isn't something that I would actively get involved with. I would leave that to the experts. We know where to steer them, but that wouldn't be, and I don't know for Spain. It'll be interesting listening to Spain and Portugal in terms of how that works.
Yeah, so I don't mean to take you outside your expertise, but in terms of age, can people borrow up to 75, 70?
Absolutely can do. So that's what I was saying, that before we found that a lot of the banks, certainly for France, were being quite restrictive and that it had to be over 100,000. And then that moved to 150,000. And then that moved to a lot of the banks that were doing it were reducing that altogether.
Yeah. Sorry, I meant in terms of age.
Oh, sorry. So I was talking money there.
Yeah.
In terms of age, we look at any age. We have a lot of retirees coming down. We have a lot of early retirees, so a lot of people over 50, 60, even in their 70s, who are wanting to borrow just a small amount, but actually, for whatever reason, they want to keep the cash that they've got to do a renovation, whatever it might be. And we can work with those people, you know, by putting them in contact directly with some of these financial advisors. It's their bread and butter. That is what they're doing all the time. And as I say, for some of them, they've done very well. So it's a good good thing for us.
Okay, Ben, thanks. Joanne, in Spain, what are the sort of terms people could expect for a mortgage if they require it?
So obviously, in recent months, things have become a little bit more difficult than in the previous years. Things are changing on a bi-weekly basis with regards to interest rates and terms and things like that. But as a broad idea, it's amenable to non-EU citizens to be able to get mortgages. That's not a problem over here. The main banks and the private finance houses all offer different terms. So you do have to shop around. That's something that we can help you with, of course. But yeah, you can invariably borrow up to 75, sometimes 80 years of age, as long as you are in receipt of a pension that's until death, obviously, and there will be a payment or some type of insurance at the end of it should you decide to pop off before the term is finished. But other than that, yeah, it's exactly the same as in the UK or the States. Shop around for the best rates. There used to be really good rates here for fixed term of around about 1%, 1.5% over 3, 5, 10 years. That seems to have disappeared over the last few months. There seems to be 3%, 2.8, 3.4, 3.7% is what I'm hearing at the moment, maybe even a little bit higher. So it's just a case of shopping around. But yeah, mortgages, very much like Pauline said, what we tend to find is, I'd say a good 90% of our customers are buying cash. We don't get very many inquiries for mortgage clients. And if we do, it tends to be because they want to remodel a house or renovate a property and bring it into the 21st century because it's a few, you know, maybe 20, 30 years old since its last remodel. And to get the right property, they need to have that cash. And the banks here are not brilliant and not great at lending money for remodeling. They like to lend the money on the mortgage rather than on remodeling. So people are going for the mortgage on the house, keeping cash back in order to do the renovations and bring the house up to date.
Okay, many thanks. And then Lewis, again, in Portugal, are they similar terms available?
Yeah, so Portugal are very simple because as far as the banking sector is concerned, it has no imagination, and therefore it's all rule-based, and you have to follow a strict procedure, and it's as simple as that. And it's all based on affordability. The general rule is 33% of your, shall we say, disposable income and no more would be allocated to a mortgage. So that's a general rule across anybody, and that obviously affects your loan to value. Just as Joanne was saying, typical loan to value, I would say, is more around 70, although we have heard of people getting 80 and even 90% loan to value. But age is a critical aspect of this. And there are two key ages, 65 and 75. So 65 is the date, the latest date on which sort of banks treat you as anybody else. And 75 is the date after which they are reluctant to have a mortgage product end or go beyond, if you will. Okay, so that's sort of 65 to 75. So what does this mean in practical terms? I'm total agreement with Joanne. Lots of people are buying cash, especially people in nearing retirement. They've obviously got their assets. They're releasing equity, as you said, Nigel, or they're selling up in especially the US. Now it's tapered off a little bit because the euro has regained, 15% against the dollar again. But at one stage it was parity, so people were selling in the US and buying in Europe at a very, very favorable, a dollar euro exchange rate and whatever. But anyway, so what are they doing if they're going to more advanced age? Couple of strategies that people are using. One is they're actually putting the property in the name of their children. So that's something we actually see happening, especially if their children are actually involved. The other is they're getting their children to take out the mortgage and then doing a back-to-back contract with their children to agree some sort of repayment of that mortgage, because the children can obviously get a mortgage over 25, 30 years, whereas the parents can only get over 10 or 15 years. Or the other thing is they're purchasing with at a low loan to value. So they're putting up 75% and only asking for 25% for 10 years or something like that, just to do that. Completely agree with what Joanne said about refurbishment. Banks don't like to lend for refurbishment. They want to take a charge over the whole asset and the purchase. And there was another point which was actually picking up of something Pauline said, which has now just slipped my mind, and so I can't state it.
Okay. Well, anyway,
relevant, I promise.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lewis. I think we've just got one question here. That they've been recommended that they should get a power of attorney when during the buying process, and just wondered whether that's something that you think is a good idea. Who'd like to answer that one? Joanne?
A power of attorney question is one of the most common questions that we get asked whenever we do any of our road shows or clients coming into the office, etc. It seems to be an inherent mistrust from UK, especially UK clients, with regards to a power of attorney. In my personal opinion, I think a power of attorney is a fantastic tool for you to have in your armory. And there are different levels of powers of attorney that you can give. So in our case, a very popular one is if we need to get the NIE number, which is a number that's needed in order to purchase anything in Spain. If these days, the UK and the US citizens, they're outside of EU, so they're tied to a 90-day and 180-day. Every day is precious that they are in the Schengen zone without having a visa or residency. So therefore, it's a lot of the time impossible for them to be in situ for the entire purchase process over here, in which case they need to be handing over a power of attorney to somebody that can act on their behalf in their best faith. Now, they don't need to give a power of attorney where you're giving access into bank accounts and things like that, but the power of attorney can be tailored for specific things like opening a bank account, like getting an NIE number, like signing for the property for them on their behalf if they can't get out to sit in front of the notary. So don't be scared of a power of attorney, but be aware of what the power is that you're giving away. that's the biggest, information, biggest advice I can give on that one.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Lewis, Pauline, did you want to add anything there, or?
Lewis,
Go on, Pauline, go
just
on.
a quick one really, to say that in France that's slightly different. So we have a power of attorney, and so that really would be if somebody is purchasing, and it could be a vendor, so it could be either party that for whatever reason don't want to be or can't be in the country, whether that is they're purchasing and their time over here, they're still working, whatever it might be, they can give power of attorney to the notaire to sign on their behalf. And one thing that I really would want to reassure people is that with the power of attorney, it doesn't mean you're going to miss anything. So you would see exactly the same documents as if you were going to be there. Lots of the notaires now are doing video conferencing, so you can talk through if you've got any queries. You can talk to us, we'll do the translation, we will help you at every step of the way. So having a power of attorney just means that you don't physically need to be in the office to do the signing, whether it was for a compromis or a final signing, and that would be for both parties. We use it quite a lot, and it's a useful tool. But not for 1 minute think that you would be missing out by doing that. It just means you don't have to be present. You could have been present up till the day of the signing, but for whatever reason you can't be there. But power of attorney, we'd be lost without it, particularly when we had COVID. So yeah, a very useful tool. We always try and we recommend that both vendors and buyers are at both signings. And for us in France, actually, the compromis, the first signing, is probably the most important of the two, because that's the one where all the nitty-gritty is discussed. Yeah, wherever possible, be there. But if not, power of attorney is absolutely the next best thing.
Okay, many thanks. Lewis.
Yeah, I must say I found the question strange. If you're using a lawyer, you're going to get a power of attorney. There's no option. Otherwise, I can't work on your behalf. It's as simple as that, unless you're there physically. So for me, it's a no-brainer. You've got to have a power of attorney. The only thing that you could be up to for discussion is the scope of that power of that you're giving your attorney. And here I agree with what both Pauline and Joanne have said. And Portugal's very specific. You can actually say, I give you, whoever it is, and normally you give the power of attorney to more than one person, because if the main lawyer in the office is not available, then the second lawyer has to also be able to act on your behalf. And you tell them the maximum amount that they can act on in terms of signing any documents, that it's only for a purchase, for example, or for a sale, depending on which side of the thing. And then the important thing is actually the small detail, and any other activity which is related to the transaction, such as going to the water department, the electricity department, paying the taxes, registering the property, because it's a separate step and all that. And so what happens is people try, for reasons of trust, they think, well, I'm going to shackle the hands of the person who I'm supposedly entrusting, and then suddenly they find out. And I had this, it was through my father was had my power of attorney that when I bought about 30 years ago the first property I bought, and no one had told me, and we drafted a power of attorney, the lawyer drafted, but he forgot to put in a specific mention of going to, I can't remember, a specific department. I was living in the US, he was in Portugal. I had to literally get an additional document from the consulate in Miami because we couldn't complete the transaction because that power of attorney didn't cover that. So please do not try to outthink your lawyer. Let them guide you as to the scope of the power of attorney. A basic document, very little risk, and the lawyers are controlled. They can't just go off and spend your money however they wish.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And just before we leave, I just make a couple of points. One is to repeat that, we're here to help, and if you've got any questions, if you'd like an introduction to any of the panelists or to our wider network of service providers, then just contact us at expats@expatnetwork.com. Or you can obviously contact the panelists direct, and their websites are relatively straightforward, Beau Viage, Aldertons and Property Finders Spain or Algarve Senior Living. If you're ready to make your move, you might want to consider one of our discovery tours. This is basically an opportunity we have in Spain and Portugal at the moment, and we'll be adding France soon, where we can arrange a tailored tour. It's one thing to go on holiday to a place, but it's another to really understand the specific areas within the town you've chosen or within the area that you've chosen. You know, is there good broadband? You may not consider that when you're on holiday, but you do when you're there. Are there lots of holiday homes? Is it going to be noisy in the season and those sort of things? You know, what the good as well as the bad. And what we try to do is give people who can take you around and actually know the place inside out and explain which area you might want to consider within the town that you've chosen. Those are without obligation, so you don't have to use those people, but obviously they will want you to use them for the purchase once you get to that stage, and all the terms will be agreed in advance before anything happens. So you can find those on our website, and you know, hopefully some of you will find those useful. So thank you. Good luck with your move. Many thanks, Pauline, Joanne, and Lewis. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Okay.